NFT is a combination of a legal contract and a smart contract. It's something that I dreamed of when I was in law school, when I read Vitalik's white paper for Ethereum on smart contracts, and I figured, I'm studying contract law, so I'd better learn smart contracts in order to protect my job going into the future. And so what the IP NFT does is it takes that traditional legal contract and it puts it inside of the smart contract of an NFT. The underlying legal contract is the right to the underlying IP related to research. You house that inside of an NFT, or rather the NFT points towards the archive that contains the legal contract and the associated IP, thereby making a liquid, tradable IP contract. So it means that one can purchase it in an open market and resell it in an open market, unlike traditionally where you have to sell peer-to-peer to somebody who solicits the contract or the research itself. It's secured by the underlying contract language. So for example, in the first IP NFT, which is the Morten Scheibe Knudsen IP NFT, related to the research being done at the University of Copenhagen, the underlying legal contract is a sponsored research agreement with the university that says the holder of this contract has the right to any IP that may emerge out of this research. And so those terms in the legal contract secure the IP. So Friends is a fair, reasonable, ethical, non-discriminatory sub-license that allows for the IP NFT to be fractionalized into many ERC20 tokens. So what that does in effect is allow a community of people beyond just the people who love the idea of the research to become stakeholders, i.e. friends, of the underlying project. And that creates a very different thing from just a single asset that is an IP NFT, relatively illiquid, into a multiplicity of assets around which a community can form in a much stronger way. And the Friends framework, because it's a sub-license and a fractionalized sub-license, avoids some of the pitfalls of securities law that would apply otherwise to fractionalization of underlying IP. It's an innovation born out of VitaDAO and VitaDAO's legal working group, and an IP lawyer there named Chris Burns. One of the biggest legal challenges for DAOs is this idea of structuring. Most people say maybe a DAO should be wrapped inside of some kind of other legal organization. I think that that principle is a little flawed because it misses the mark as to what a DAO should be, which ultimately should be an on-chain organization that is liability limiting in its own right. Most courts haven't recognized that yet, and most jurisdictions haven't recognized that yet, but I do see an overarching trend to recognize DAOs as organizations that limit liability in their own right, which is what we want, right? We want the DAO to be the LLC of Ethereum or whatever other chain. And so the struggle that many people make when they're facing forming a DAO is whether to form a legal wrapper. At VitaDAO, we've taken a philosophical position to say, no, we shouldn't form a legal wrapper. We should have a DAO that is a DAO in its own right, a true DAO. And when we want to do stuff in the real world that doesn't allow for a DAO itself to be the counterparty to a contract, we form an agent. That agent can be a natural person, like you or me, or a juridical person, like a corporation. And so what this DAO structure allows for is an agent-centric business model, where the DAO itself is still unincorporated, just formed on-chain, registered with the state of Ethereum, and the agents can be registered in Canada or Switzerland or elsewhere. I think that provides a more flexible business model. But it's a challenge that many DAOs face. People reach out to me all the time and they say, hey, how should we wrap our DAO? What jurisdiction should we choose? And you saw DYDX, for example, recently posted a proposed Guernsey trust structure for DAOs. And other DAOs have all kinds of funky legal structures that, in my opinion, miss the mark. That's yet to be determined, right? Overarching purpose is how do we democratize IP related to psychedelics, which may be one of the greatest tools for repairing some of the ails that we face as a species, whether it's anxiety and depression or PTSD coming out of the coronavirus pandemic. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't monopolize the IP into a few individual actors or big pharma? Because these really are medicines of the people. Since ages ago, right? Since, in some ways, and since Christianity democratized access to divinity away from the hallowed halls of Eleusis, available only to senators and the elite of ancient Greece, into the rooms of people around their tables, like in the Last Supper, where the message was, you can have this experience at home with your friends. And I think that that democratization of access to the divine experience is integral to psychedelics as a whole. And we lose sight of that in a world where IP gets monopolized into just large pharmaceutical companies or large psychedelic pharmaceutical companies. And it takes that power away from the people who deserve it most of all. And so PsyDAO's mission, in part, is to democratize psychedelics again and to maintain that democratization and disrupt the monopolization trend in the psychedelics sector. So the reason that I became a lawyer was to pursue what I was pursuing as an anthropologist, which was investigating the religious traditions and the medicines of indigenous peoples of the Amazon, which I felt was one of the most compelling and interesting sets of information in the world. When you look into it and you start to realize that these people are doing something that is totally different. They have a profession where they have a replicable way of accessing a totally different state of mind than what they call the spirit world. And you know, if you read fantasy books or Lord of the Rings or something, it seems like a world of fiction, but for them it's nonfiction. So it's worth investigating. So I went to law school to go deeper on that, to understand what are the IP rights here that the indigenous peoples have, what are their rights to their natural resources, and how do we go about protecting them? Because like Pope Francis says, the obligation of each living person is to help liberation of the oppressed. And the people who are among the most liberated are the indigenous peoples of the world. So I went to the Amazon during law school when most of my colleagues were at big law firms in DC or New York or Berlin or London. Instead, I was at the heart of the Amazon in Peru, and there encountered a very interesting art form related to psychedelic plant use, the use of ayahuasca and the use of another plant called Conawasta. And I decided there that I'd better go deeper and learn how to protect this IP. And so while I have my day job working with startups, working with crypto startups, advising on DAOs, how to form, how to comply with securities laws, I have my pro bono work, which is working with these tribes of the Amazon. And I think in PsyDAO there's a unique opportunity for us to not only help to democratize IP and to democratize access to psychedelics, but to also do it in a way that gives back and helps to liberate these people who are oppressed through benefit sharing, through access, and through, in some ways, you know, a co-ownership of the underlying DAO with people who previously didn't have access to that kind of opportunity, and for whom it's actually much easier to open up a bank account on the blockchain than it is to open up a bank account in the traditional bank of Peru. And so I imagine a future whereby the work that I've done in Peru is integrated into the work that we do at PsyDAO, so that members of the DAO are actually some of these native peoples in the Amazon who have their first bank account as their wallet where they hold their DAO tokens. And they're able to liquidate those easily into an internet cafe or a currency exchange on the ground in the middle of the jungle. And we've already proven that model to work in some of the work that I've done pro bono, working with the tribe.